How did people manage to endure brutal Arctic winters in homes fashioned from earth and timber, where the temperature could plunge far below freezing? When we picture Norse settlements, we tend to imagine snow-covered villages battered by relentless winds. Yet historical records show that these communities didn't merely survive, they prospered. Their advantage was not sorcery, but surprisingly advanced engineering. Every component of their dwellings, from the base to the rooftop, worked together as a single heat-holding system. These structures were less like houses and more like carefully crafted thermal fortresses built to cooperate with the unforgiving northern climate. Stay with the video to learn how the Norse transformed the icy wilderness into an ally, and why their homes could outperform many modern ones in warmth. I'll also share a secret very few people know. The Viking longhouse wasn't simply a building, it was a living presence. These northern sailors who spent much of their lives at sea brought shipbuilding principles onto land, creating a form of architecture found nowhere else. Their homes, stretching 30 meters and sometimes nearly 80, had gently curved walls reminiscent of a ship's hull. This curvature wasn't chosen for aesthetics, but to tame the vicious northern winds, allowing gusts to glide past instead of slamming into the structure. Life under a longhouse roof was collective. There were no separate rooms in the modern sense. The family patriarch, relatives, laborers, and enslaved people all lived together beneath one expansive roof. This shared living arrangement was not just practical, it was essential for warmth. Dozens of people in one enclosed space generated a considerable amount of heat, becoming part of the building's climate system. The longhouse, or langhus, functioned like a unified organism, a self-contained ark meant to endure months of deep winter. Builders oriented these houses with the cardinal directions to reduce heat loss. Entrances were rarely placed on the ends. Those walls faced the harsh winds. Instead, doorways were tucked along the long sides, often protected by additional structures. The walls of these earth-anchored dwellings were thick, layered, and ingeniously assembled. Vikings didn't depend solely on wood. Timber was precious and, by itself, a poor insulator. Instead, they developed a multi-layered sandwich of materials, where each layer played a specific role in trapping heat, like an early version of modern insulation technology perfected over centuries. The house's foundation began with a sturdy wooden framework. Deep-set posts, usually carved from solid pine or oak, supported the heavy roof. The gaps between these posts were not filled with planks, as you might expect, but with natural materials far better suited to insulation. We need more wood for the fire. The stew is nearly done. Rugger Skull, may your harvests be bountiful. But what exactly filled those walls? Tell us what you think. How does the idea of a ship-inspired communal house sound to you? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes exploring ancient technology. Are you ready to hear the truth about what Vikings actually used to construct their houses? When we imagine Norse dwellings, we picture log cabins. But in regions like Iceland and Greenland, timber was scarce. The Vikings solved this problem with a building method that relied on minimal wood and maximized the use of abundant local materials. The wooden frame was the only component that truly required timber. Thick posts of birch, pine, or oak formed the house's skeleton. This load-bearing structure held up the roof and defined the shape of the walls. But the walls themselves were not wooden at all. They were more akin to earth-reinforced structures, which is the key to their incredible warmth. Before the frame was erected, builders laid a ring of large flat stones around the site. This stone base served two vital purposes. It leveled the ground and, more importantly, lifted the wooden posts away from moisture, preventing rot. Between the posts, the Vikings packed the most important insulating material of their era: turf. Turf, dense blocks of earth held together by thick grass roots, was cut into chunky bricks. These earthen bricks were stacked in wide layers to form massive walls. At ground level, a wall could be 1.5 meters thick, sometimes even 2 meters. The walls tapered as they rose, creating extra stability. Builders often arranged the turf in interlocking patterns to eliminate gaps and ensure the highest density possible. Why was turf so effective? Its structure contained countless tiny air pockets trapped within the soil and roots. Still air is one of the best insulators known to humans, just like the principle behind modern foam insulation. Turf wasn't just building material, it was alive. In spring, grass sprouted across the outer walls, strengthening them and blending the house into the surrounding landscape. The roots bound everything together, turning the home into an extension of the earth itself. See how the hillside embraces our dwelling, shielding it from curious eyes and winter storms. How effective do you think these natural materials were compared to what we use today? But what if I told you that fire wasn't the only heating system inside a Viking home? The next secret may seem shocking to us, but for the Norse, it was simply practical engineering. Throughout the winter, they shared their homes with their animals. Far from being a sign of poverty or primitiveness, it was a brilliant method of conserving fuel and ensuring survival in brutal weather. The longhouse wasn't solely a human dwelling, it was also the winter shelter for livestock. These two functions were intentionally intertwined. Inside, the building was divided into two main zones: the living quarters and the work or stall area. Often, half or even more of the entire structure was reserved for animals: cattle, sheep, goats, even horses. These creatures represented the wealth and survival of any household, and protecting them through the winter was essential. The only barrier between people and animals was a simple wooden partition, not airtight, just enough to mark the boundary. This allowed air and heat to circulate freely. Humans and animals literally breathed the same warm air under one roof. The genius of this system came down to physics. A single cow gives off an immense amount of heat, and a herd of them essentially acted like a natural furnace. Their body warmth, produced day and night, supplemented the heat from the hearth for free. This warmth drifted upward following convection and naturally flowed into the slightly elevated living area, mingling with fire heat and maintaining a stable indoor temperature. The animals benefited as well. An isolated barn would freeze solid in these climates, endangering the entire herd. Living close to humans, they gained shelter and warmth from the hearth. It was a mutual arrangement that supported the survival of both. Of course, this setup came with drawbacks, most notably the smell. But to a medieval Scandinavian, the scent of livestock was simply a normal part of life. Staying warm mattered far more than maintaining fresh air. And with the constant fire burning, smoke helped mask unwanted odors. If you find this solution clever in its simplicity, give the video a like and subscribe so you don't miss more insights into how medieval people endured extreme conditions. Now let's uncover another secret. How did Vikings keep warm without glass windows? The greatest enemy of comfortable heating in northern climates isn't only the cold, it's the wind. A single draft can steal heat faster than freezing temperatures alone. Viking architecture focused heavily on eliminating uncontrolled airflow. The first thing you'll notice when studying longhouses is that they had virtually no windows. Glass was a luxury, found mostly in churches, not homes. Occasionally, tiny slits were carved into walls, but in winter these were sealed tightly with straw, moss, or wooden plugs. As a result, Daily life unfolded in near-perpetual twilight, illuminated only by the central hearth. This was a trade-off they willingly accepted. Darkness in exchange for warmth. Ventilation and daylight came instead through openings in the roof, which we'll explore later. Entrances, too, were engineered with care. Doors are always weak points in a warm structure, so Vikings developed a range of defenses to minimize heat loss. Longhouse doors were intentionally built low, so low that anyone entering had to crouch. While this posture happened to show respect, the real purpose was practical. A small entryway allowed less cold air to rush in. The doors themselves were thick and heavy, fitted snugly into the frame. Viking doors didn't swing on metal hinges as ours do. They pivoted on wooden pins set into grooves at the top and bottom, creating an exceptionally tight seal. Close the door quickly. Man, the frost bites tonight. Come, warm yourself by the fire. Many homes added an extra layer of protection. A small entry chamber or vestibule built outside the main doorway. This space acted as a buffer. A person entered the unheated room first, shut the outer door, shook off snow, and then opened the inner one. This airlock prevented the wind from slicing straight into the main living area. Ah, warmth at last. That cold stings like a blade. Come near the fire, my love. Entrances were also carefully placed. Builders avoided placing two doors directly across from each other, which would create a draft tunnel. Most entrances were located along the long sides of the building and shielded from the strongest winds, sometimes with a projecting wall or even a small earth mound for added protection. Imagine spending months in a dim, smoky room to preserve heat. In the next section, we'll explore the heart of the longhouse, the structure that provided warmth, light, and life. At the center of every longhouse stood its most vital feature, the hearth. This was the soul of the structure, the primary source of heat, light, and daily activity. But unlike the compact fireplaces we know today, the Viking hearth was a long, shallow trench stretching along the middle of the living space. Some were 10 or even 15 meters in length, allowing them to warm the entire hall. I remember a winter harsher than this, when the fjord froze for 3 long moons. We tracked the great white bear across the ice. This fire pit wasn't just an open blaze on the ground. Large stones lined its edges, performing multiple roles. They prevented the fire from spreading. They absorbed tremendous heat. And they released that warmth slowly over many hours, functioning as a kind of ancient thermal battery. Wood was the preferred fuel, but in places where forests were scarce, such as Iceland, the people relied heavily on peat. Peat burned slowly and steadily, and was easy to gather. Collecting enough peat for winter was a crucial task, one that could determine whether a family survived the cold season. Beyond being a heater, the long hearth was the main light source in a house without windows. Flickering flames cast shifting shadows on carved wooden beams, on the smoky haze clinging to the ceiling, and on the faces of the people gathered around it. Daily life revolved around this firelit corridor, a fine blaze tonight. It warms the spirit as much as the bones. It was also the communal kitchen. Large iron pots hung from chains or stood on tripods above the flames. Broths simmered, porridge bubbled, and meat roasted, filling the house with a blend of smoke, cooking smells, and the earthy scent of livestock. Now here's something surprising. Vikings had no chimneys, yet they didn't suffocate from smoke. The smoke rising from the long hearth filled the upper reaches of the hall, creating a dense layer above head height. This might sound unpleasant, but it had an unexpected advantage. It preserved the building. Constant exposure to hot smoke and soot tanned the wood, driving away insects, preventing rot and extending the life of the beams. In other words, the house smoked itself like a piece of cured meat. Of course, the smoke needed somewhere to escape. At the peak of the roof, directly above the hearth, builders left a small opening called a llori. This served both as ventilation and as the only source of natural daylight besides the door. The llori wasn't a simple hole. It had a movable wooden cover that could be adjusted with a long pole. Managing this vent required skill. In the winter months, it might be barely opened, just enough for the thickest smoke to drift out, but not enough to let warm air escape. Air quality suffered, of course, but heat was more important. The fire burns strong tonight. It keeps the cold spirits at bay. Pass the horn, brother. But the roof was more than a vent. It was the house's primary shield against the elements. The longhouse roof was as crucial to heat conservation as its thick walls. It had to hold back snow, repel water, and insulate against freezing temperatures. Like the walls, it was constructed as a living, layered system. The base of the roof was a robust framework of rafters. Thin poles or planks were laid across these rafters to form the first layer of decking. But this wooden surface alone was far from weatherproof. The next layer was expertly crafted birch bark. Large sheets were peeled from birch trees and placed overlapping like shingles. Birch bark is naturally waterproof thanks to its resin content, making it an ideal ancient roofing membrane. Heave that piece up, set it snug against the last. Over the birch bark came the most distinctive layer, turf. The Vikings placed thick slabs of grass-covered soil across the roof, often in 2 or even 3 layers. This turf could weigh several tons, which meant the underlying structure had to be exceptionally strong. The turf served several essential roles. 1. Insulation. A thick earthen layer trapped heat, preventing it from rising out of the house. In winter, this acted like a giant wool cap. 2. Protection. The turf shielded the birch bark from sunlight and physical damage, ensuring the waterproof layer stayed intact. 3. Strengthening. Over time, grass grew across the roof, binding the turf blocks with fresh roots. The roof became a living, interwoven mat, resilient, self-repairing, and fully integrated into the landscape. The house quite literally grew into its surroundings. A turf roof did more than keep the weather out. It blended the longhouse into the very earth around it. From a distance, especially in spring or summer, a Viking home might look like a hill crowned with wild grasses or flowers. This natural camouflage protected it from storms and helped the structure endure for decades. Inside, beneath that thick living roof, the longhouse was never truly silent. Wind moaned through the beams, snow slid in heavy sheets, rain drummed like thousands of tiny fingers. But the turf softened everything, turning harsh sounds into a steady, comforting murmur. Ah, listen. The roof sings with the storm. It has known many winters. The interior space of a longhouse was designed around both practicality and community. Along the walls, wooden platforms served multiple purposes: benches during the day, beds at night, and storage underneath. Thick woolen blankets, fur pelts, and woven tapestries added insulation and a bit of color to otherwise dim surroundings. The longhouse wasn't divided into many rooms, but there were distinct zones. Animals were often stabled at one end during winter, their body heat contributing to the warmth of the hall. The central area was for cooking, crafting, and daily activity. The far end might be reserved for the chieftain, the elders, or honored guests. Daily chores filled the space: spinning thread, repairing tools, carving wood, preparing food. Children played in the dim corners. Elders shared stories of gods, monsters, and distant voyages. And every sound, laughter, hammering, crackling fire, echoed softly under the weight of the turf roof. "Pass me that blade, lad. The edge needs work before tomorrow's hunt." Despite the simplicity of their tools, Viking builders achieved remarkable strength and stability in their structures. Their joinery relied on wood pegs, mortise and tenon joints, and carefully cut beams that locked together like puzzle pieces. Iron nails were valuable and used sparingly, often only where absolutely necessary. The result was a building that flexed instead of snapping when buffeted by wind. A well-made longhouse was both rigid and alive, shifting subtly with the seasons, settling deeper into the ground year after year. We do not fight the wind. We learn to lean with it. What's most striking about these homes is how deeply they reflect the people who built them. Vikings were seafarers, farmers, warriors, and craftspeople. Their houses had to accommodate all of these roles. They needed warmth, room to work, and protection from the brutal northern climate. But they also needed a place where the community could gather. A hall for feasts, songs, trade, and storytelling. The longhouse was that and more. It was a workshop, a shelter, a social hub, and a symbol of belonging. When night fell and the hearth glowed red, shadows danced across the beams, mingling with the faint light from the smoke vent above. Outside, wind swept across the hills. Inside, voices rose in stories of gods and ancestors. Tonight, we sit together. Tomorrow, we sail. But the hall remains, our anchor in the world. The longhouse was never just a building. It was a living space shaped by nature, tradition, and the needs of its people. A structure of earth, wood, fire, and community, enduring, adaptable, and unmistakably Viking.